Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer from American Law Café. Today, we're tackling a challenge that every litigator has to master, getting your case into federal court. You know, it's the big leagues, a huge strategic advantage. But here's the thing, you can't just waltz in. The front door is locked tight.
So why even bother, right? Why fight so hard to get in? Well, think about it. Federal court can give you a massive strategic edge. We're talking different rules, maybe a more favorable jury pool, and judges who are appointed for life. But, and this is a big but, federal courts are picky. They're courts of limited jurisdiction, which means they can't just hear any old case. You've got to prove you belong there.
So let's stick with that locked door idea. To get in, you need a key. And for one of the most common ways in, what we call diversity jurisdiction, you don't just need one key, you need two. And today, we're going to break down exactly what those two keys are, and more importantly, how you can use them to unlock that door.
All right, let's grab that first key. Now, this one is interesting. It has absolutely nothing to do with what your case is about. It doesn't care how much money is on the line. Nope. This key is all about one thing: who you're suing and where everyone's from.
This is what's known as the complete diversity rule, and it's been around forever, since 1806. The rule itself is brutally simple. No plaintiff can be from the same state as any defendant, period. It's an all-or-nothing game. So, let's say you're a plaintiff from California suing someone from Arizona. Great, you're in. But what happens if you add a second defendant, who also happens to be from California? Boom, game over. The federal courthouse door just slams shut in your face. Just one overwrap, and you're out.
Okay, so that sounds pretty straightforward, right? No same states on opposite sides. Easy. Well, not so fast, because this is where the law gets tricky. What does citizenship actually mean to a court? It's not as simple as checking a driver's license. How do you figure out the citizenship of a person, or a massive, sprawling corporation, or a complicated partnership? That's the real question. So this is the first big puzzle we have to solve. We have to figure out the citizenship for every single party involved. And guess what? The rules are totally different depending on whether we're talking about a person, a corporation, or some other kind of business. So let's dive in and break it down.
Okay, first up, people. For an individual, legal citizenship is all about something called domicile. And I need you to hear this. Domicile is not the same thing as residence. You can have a bunch of residences, right? A summer home, an apartment in the city, but you only have one domicile. Think of it like your true permanent home base, the place you always intend to return to. And to establish a new domicile, you need two things. It's a formula. You have to be physically there, and you have to have the intent to stay indefinitely. You need both, no exceptions.
And there's this classic, kind of creepy case called Mass v. Perry that illustrates this perfectly. So you've got this married couple, he's from France, she's from Mississippi, they're grad students living in an apartment in Louisiana. They sue their Louisiana landlord because, get this, they discover he's installed two-way mirrors and has been spying on them. Just awful. So the landlord, trying to get the case thrown out of federal court, says, hey, Mrs. Mass lives in Louisiana, I live in Louisiana, no diversity. But the court said, not so fast. Just because she was living there for school didn't mean it was her domicile. She was a student. She never intended to stay forever. Her true legal home was still Mississippi. So complete diversity was intact and the case could go forward.
All right, so that's how we handle people. But what about a giant company? I mean, think about a corporation like Hertz. They have offices, cars, and employees in practically every state. So where in the world is their home? How on earth do you nail down the citizenship of something that's literally everywhere?
So for corporations, it turns out they can actually have two states of citizenship. First, the state where they are incorporated, that's the easy one, and second, their principal place of business. Now, that second part used to be an absolute nightmare. Courts had this business activities test where they'd try to figure out where the company had the most employees or made the most sales. It was just a mess, super unpredictable. So finally, in a case called Hertz Corp versus Friend, the Supreme Court said enough of this. They threw out the old, messy Braun test and gave us a much cleaner brain test. They called it the nerve center test.
The nerve center is exactly what it sounds like. It's the brain of the operation, the command and control center. It's the one single place where the top executives direct and control everything the company does. Now, for most companies, this is going to be their main headquarters. The court was super clear. It's not where the most widgets are made. It's where the orders to make the widgets come from. It gives us a nice, simple, predictable answer.
Okay, we've got people, we've got corporations. Now for the last piece of the citizenship puzzle. And you really, really need to pay attention to this one, because this is a classic trap. It's a landmine that has blown up federal cases for so many unsuspecting lawyers. We're talking about partnerships and LLCs.
So remember how a corporation is treated like its own person for citizenship? Well, for partnerships, throw that idea right out the window. The Supreme Court laid down a really harsh rule in a case called Carden. For any unincorporated association, you have to look at the citizenship of every single one of its members. And I'm not just talking about the main partners running the show, I mean everyone. Even the passive, limited partners who just invested some money. This means if you have a partnership with 1,000 members, and just one of them is from the same state as the person you're suing, that's it. Diversity is destroyed. Your case is getting tossed out of federal court.
Okay, so let's say you've done it. You've navigated the tricky waters of citizenship, and you have complete diversity. You've used that first key. But hold on, you're not in yet. You still need that second key to get through the door. And this key is all about the money.
This is called the amount in controversy requirement. And the rule is simple. The total value of the plaintiff's claim has to be more than $75,000. And that's not including interest and costs. So $75,000 exactly? Nope, not enough. It's got to be $75,001 at a minimum. So you're probably wondering, how does a judge know if the case is really worth that much? Well, they use something called the legal certainty test. And honestly, it's pretty generous to the plaintiff. The court basically takes the plaintiff's word for it, as long as the claim is made in good faith. For a defendant to get the case kicked out, they have to prove to a legal certainty that the plaintiff could never, ever recover more than $75,000. And let me tell you, that is an incredibly high bar to clear. But sometimes a claim is just so ridiculous it can't pass the laugh test. Let me introduce you to the Diefenthals. This couple sued an airline for $50,000. Why? Because a flight attendant was rude to them and wouldn't let them sit in the smoking section of first class. They claimed they were humiliated. Well, the judge took one look at this and, as you can see from his quote, basically said, "You've got to be kidding me." He decided that there was no way by any wild stretch of the imagination their humiliation was worth the jurisdictional amount, which was only 10 grand back then. Case dismissed.
All right, let's bring it all home. You've solved the citizenship puzzle. You've cleared the amount in controversy hurdle. You have both keys in your hand. You're ready to open the door. But wait, there is one final golden rule you absolutely cannot forget.
And here it is. This is so important. Jurisdiction is determined at one moment and one moment only, the instant the complaint is filed. Think of it like a photograph. The court takes a snapshot of the case right at the beginning. Are the parties diverse then? Is the amount in controversy met then? If the answer is yes, jurisdiction is locked in. It doesn't matter if the defendant moves to the plaintiff's state a week later. It doesn't matter if the value of the case changes. What happens after that initial snapshot is irrelevant for jurisdiction.
So let's boil this all down to one simple cheat sheet. This is everything you need to remember. You need your two keys. Number 1, complete diversity. Number 2, an amount in controversy over $75,000. For the players, remember, it's domicile for individuals, the nerve center for corporations, and you have to count all the members for partnerships. And finally, the timing. Everything, and I mean everything, is locked in the moment that complaint is filed. That's the whole game right there.
Look, knowing all these rules isn't just about passing an exam. This is pure strategy. Getting into federal court or keeping your opponent out of it can literally make or break a case. It can change everything. So now that you have the keys, the real question is, how are you going to use them to open the right doors for your client?
Hey, if this breakdown helped clear things up for you, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. We're always putting out new explainers just like this one to take really complicated legal topics and make them make sense.
And if you want to go even deeper with more legal analysis and some amazing stories from the world of law, be sure to check out our full show, American Law Café. You can find it anywhere you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for watching.